you back into the gloom and doom and monotony of work, and that's the case out at the Castle as well in Owings Mills. Luke Jones joins us here, and this is this isn't not the fun time of the year, right? Like, we like going to the Combine, we like going to the Super Bowl, we like talking football in the offseason, but we're going to watch these other teams play, and meanwhile, the Ravens are going to be part of this huge scramble about, are we going to keep coaches, are we going to move coaches? A lot of other places, they don't have a head coach right now. And, the one thing I think gets lost in all this fire, the coach and all that, are the actual players they have under contract, Luke. And, this offseason, it will be as tumultuous, I think, as any, right? I mean, I think there's going to be, I don't want to say dramatic, but it could be very dramatic this offseason as to which players aren't back and which ones are.
Well, I think you look at this, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so much focus on firing coordinators, position coaches, whatever.
Yeah, who are they going to coach?
That
right.
You kind of glaze over the fact that they're going to have player changes, and they always do. Even in their best years, you're going to have some pretty significant roster turnover. It's just the reality of the salary cap and the reality of the NFL. But I think this year specifically, going 8-8. Knowing that they weren't good enough, and what we've talked about really for the last couple of years, their reliance, and look at the breakdown of their cap, the amount of resources they have devoted to older players. I think there are some really interesting discussions as far as who exactly returns. Now, we know Steve Smith retired. He took his nameplate. He cleaned out his locker on Monday. It was very apparent. He was saying his goodbyes. He was very clear after the game in Cincinnati. So, but he was going to be a free agent anyway, so there wasn't any cap commitment there moving forward. But there's a really interesting list of players. I think you start with Elvis Dumervil, who talked on Monday, but very much was asked about his future and said, "Hey, I'm under contract for another year, but."
And he's a big number, right?
Yeah, a big number, and a guy coming off Achilles surgery that we learned at the end of the season. That's what he had dealt with, and
he's been around this before. He had to pack his bags in Denver, sort of in some strange way as well. So I mean, for the guys who know that they might not be coming back, this isn't a shocker that the media would be bringing this up. I mean, they've discussed this with their agents, and when you've only stepped on the field 5 or 6 games and haven't been a factor, and they paid you a lot of money, things are going to change. I mean, Ozzy's not good about those type of things. Ozzy needs to get better football players and manage the money he has, right?
Right, and you look at Elvis Dumervil just as one example. I mean, there are plenty of other veterans you could talk about, guys like Ladarius Webb. Dennis Pitta's got a higher cap figure this year. So there's a long list of guys. Some of them are easy. Kyle Arrington clearly will be cut. Kendrick Lewis, I would be surprised if he's not a salary cap casualty. So you have some of those that are more slam dunk types of decisions, but then you get into the guys that Dumervil has an 8.375 salary cap number for 2017. It's the last year of his contract. At first blush, you'd say, well, probably going to be let go then. They saved $6 million in cap space, but at the same time, we've also been talking about the pass rush for this team. So, it's one thing to say you want to cut Elvis Dumervil, but then you need to replace him. Or
who's going to play?
You need to replace the production you were hoping to get from him in 2016 that never came to fruition. So, it's easy to say you want to get rid of guys, and clearly we're going to see some movement there because they do need to clear some more cap space, and they do want to get younger, but you got to bring in guys that fit. You can't bring in another Zadarius Smith-type young player that doesn't give you anything in that department. So, these are really tricky decisions, and, it's going to be a really interesting offseason in that regard for Ozzie Newsome. But I think we all agree this team does need to get younger. They have some young talent, but they need to get more of that. And whether that means perhaps there's that right free agent out on the market, like they spent with Eric Weddle, who wasn't a young guy, but certainly filled a very clear need that they had. You look for those guys, and then clearly the draft is going to be a big part of this as well. But Monday, certainly, while there was plenty of talk about Marty Morningwig and no resolution the first full day of the off season for the Ravens, there was lots of talk about free agents and other veteran players like a Doomerville, like a Ladarius Webb, whether they were going to be back or not in 2017.
He is Luke Jones. He will be at the Castle this week, and, our eyes are, we got to get to the Terps at some point, right? In that meltdown on Sunday, there'll be full focus on that moving forward, but these seasons sort of cross over, and huge disappointment all the way around to start the year, right? That the Terps' effort on top of the Ravens, it's kind of brought the doldrums around here this week, I think.
Well, and I didn't watch. Full disclosure, I didn't watch a minute of the Terps game on Sunday.
I did. I went back and forth, right? I found the Ravens to be far less compelling.
No, I hear you.
As the afternoon went on.
Yeah, but, especially someone like me who's out there every single day, it's just,
picture
of habit. You watch the game. Even preseason games I watch every minute, or at least most of it every minute. But, it's certainly a disappointment. I know Mark Turgeon talked about it after the game that a team like Nebraska, you got to kill them or they can come back against you, and certainly that's what happened. They had the issue with the pressure and that they hadn't seen. That Turgeon even acknowledged they hadn't seen that all year, hadn't really practiced it. So that's on him. But it's certainly. Sunday was a tough day. There's no doubt about it.
Well, Nebraska had a better week than any of us then, right? They've moved into that conversation now. The Terps get the week off. They get Michigan this week, and then the big game against Indiana next week. And Indiana's clearly reeling. They felt a little bit of the Cornhusker thing that we felt on Sunday, right?
Yeah, they did. So, for this Terps team, it's going to be really interesting. I think everyone likes what they see from the freshman talent. There's no doubt about that. But we've seen how the team has profiled. They've certainly had their injuries in the front court, and that hasn't helped. They've overcome that for the most part, but that's something you don't want to be dealing with, where you're forced to play small, and when you do have big guys, you're questioning some of the consistency. But with a young team, it's just it's very mercurial. You're going to have some days where this team looks like they could be a Sweet 16 kind of operation, and other games where you see what happened at the end of the Nebraska game, where you're wondering if they're going to make the NCAA tournament. So I expect them to be without having seen a ton of Big Ten action so far, just getting conference play underway, but I expect them to be more of a middle of the pack kind of Big Ten team, despite the fact that they have a 13-2 record. I think you look at the top. Clearly Wisconsin tough.
Purdue lost this week too. There's been no cream rising so far, at least, right?
Yeah.
Other than Nebraska.
I think I still feel Wisconsin will be that, or it feels that way. But you mentioned Indiana, a team that looked really, really tough early. Like they could be really tough, and they've lost some games here, and they've looked vulnerable. So it's hard to say right now. There's especially for the Terps and for anyone watching Big Ten, it's still, now they're getting into it where they've been in the Big Ten for a few years, but you still don't have a great read on what some of these programs are all about, really. So,
and some of them are in transition, too. Wisconsin's in transition. I feel like Indiana, he's just got there. He's going to be there a while. They're building something. He's not looking for the next job, So I sort of get the vibe that some of these coaches are going to be hanging around the next 5 to 7 years. I feel like Turgeon's going to be here in 2020. I do, So thinking in those terms, that's going to create, I think, the rivalries and the matchups that I think a lot of fans want, and it can't be as much one and done as last year was. You can only have so many diamond stones, and then you really don't have a program, right? You just have transfer you, and we're going to rev up the engines for 12 weeks, right?
Yeah, and you look at the structure of this team right now, this roster. They're set up to have some continuity, and we'll see about Melo Trimble. The thing about him, you kind of look to see who else is going to be in the draft at that position, being the point guard. He's clearly not going to be a guy who has the size to be a 2 in the NBA. So, he's going to have to handle the rock. And, I think some of the issues that dogged him through the pre-draft process that he went through this past summer are still going to be there after his junior year. So, I don't think that's even a complete 100% certainty that he's gone. But even if he is, you do have Anthony Cowan now, who I think has shown plenty that he can take over that kind of role and not necessarily be as dominant, but certainly can do a really nice job there. And you like what you see from Justin Jackson. And Kevin Huerter, despite the disappointment of Sunday's game, he puts together a terrific performance. So there's a lot to like. There's more help on the way over the next year or two. So this year, we'll see. I think you look at their record right now and say, okay, even with the loss, they're 13-2. We know they didn't have a great non-conference schedule, though. So, where do they wind up in Big Ten play, and how does that relate to the rest of the conference? And then when you look at where they are from a tournament resume standpoint, it's going to be very, very interesting. I'll say what I said early in the season when we talked about this team. I do think they're going to be better at the end of the year than they are right now, than they were in November and December. So you want to see progress, and that's where people who have had some questions about Mark Turgeon's X's and O's, about Mark Turgeon's on-court coaching, that's something that you do want to see. You want to see improvement there. He certainly can find talented kids. We've seen that the last few years, but you want to see that translate to these guys, one, sticking around, and I think they will. I don't look at any of these freshmen and say, oh, that guy's a candidate to be going to the NBA a la Diamond Stone, or trying to go to the NBA anyway. So you want to see some progress, and if that means they wind up in the NCAA tournament, then great, and you see what happens after that. But certainly just want to see this team compete and at least be in the mix in the Big Ten, and that's probably all you should really ask for. If you're being realistic, coming off of the amount of turnover they had from last year.
I would have liked to have seen them hold a 12-point lead with a couple minutes left to go on Sunday. And, it's nice to see Huerter step up as well. And I think it's going to be an interesting couple of months as this thing sort of simmers out in Owings Mills as to what the changes are going to be out there. We're going to be monitoring all that. You will get the news first on the WNST Tech Service, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here with the SSV on WNST on Thursday from 3 until 5. And, of course, our social media, Facebook, Twitter, will be alive with information. Last thing on the football side of things, as the Ravens go into where 20 other teams are and 6 other teams are looking for coaches right now, maybe more, and, once these coordinators start hitting the streets and people start moving around and seats start to open up, it will be a lively couple weeks before you and I even get to Houston. Meanwhile, they're going to play football on these Saturdays and Sundays, and we'll be watching, and, man, this AFC, it really is. It's a shame in a lot of ways, the Antonio Brown reach and how awful they looked in Cincinnati. But now you look up and you see the Pittsburgh Steelers hosting a Miami Dolphins team that may have Tannehill, may not, may have Matt Moore. Oakland and Houston, who knows who's going to be quarterbacking these teams. There was really some opportunity there. And we'll watch Detroit and Seattle and the Giants and Green Bay. And, Green Bay looks like a favorite flavor right now, as does Pittsburgh, because both of those teams are playing well, and they have quarterbacks that are playing well, which is more important than anything else. But this is a weird playoff where so many of these teams, Oakland is 115-1 to win the Super Bowl. That's a longer odd. That's an insane odd on a team that's already in the tournament, only has to win 3 games. But that's how long the odds are with no quarterback.
Well, it's insane to also think that you just look at that team at 12-4, and those are the odds. And the reality is, would anyone take that bet right now? No, probably not. So it is disappointing from that standpoint. And we've talked about this though. The Pittsburgh loss is one thing, but go back and look at what happened in October. If the Ravens win one of those games, they're still in it going into Week 17, and I'm guessing there's a much different emotional level and focus level going into that Cincinnati.
Yeah, I can't equate what I saw Sunday with anything that I would have seen on Sunday had the game mattered, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. As lousy, and they looked lousy on Sunday, it was a meaningless game. And for the fans who were saying it was meaningless, I'm seeing so many people that are completely outraged at what happened, and I don't
get
care.
over it.
For me, it feels a lot like being outraged about a terrible preseason performance. I'm not saying you take any positive from it whatsoever, but I'm not ready to completely change my tune about how I felt about John Harbaugh. Or on the flip side, if they scored 40 points against the Bengals, I wasn't going to change my opinion on Marty Mornhinweg and the offense. I had 15 games to formulate an opinion on what the offense was. So, but your point is well taken that you look at the state of this AFC playoffs right now. Clearly, you have New England at the top. I think you have, as much as it pains Ravens fans to admit this, you have to give Pittsburgh their props. They ended up finishing 11-5 when, 6 weeks ago we were wondering if there was going to be a team to get the 9 wins in the AFC North to win it, and clearly Pittsburgh did better than that. So you give them some credit, but I think the Ravens going to Heinz Field and giving the Steelers everything they could handle and having a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, makes you feel that if the Ravens had gotten in, even if it was a situation where they had gotten in as a wild card and had to go to Pittsburgh, hypothetically speaking, if they had played better in October and had that kind of an opportunity, you would have still felt they had a puncher's chance. And certainly you would have liked their chances against Miami, who they blew out when Miami had Ryan Tannehill, and an Oakland team that lost Derek Carr and McGloin dealing with an injury. So, I mean, it's just it's a much different animal, and there is some frustration there. And it's not to say that the Ravens would have been guaranteed to make a run. They could have bowed out to any of those teams based on what we saw with just the inconsistency of this team. But you do look at the playoffs, and it is pretty amazing to think of the state of the quarterbacking in the AFC, and that's even acknowledging that Joe Flacco didn't have a particularly good year for the Ravens, but you put him in that mix and you see some of those other quarterbacks, you would have liked the Ravens' chances, but alas, didn't do enough work earlier in the season to keep themselves in position, and you're in a spot where you have to win at Pittsburgh, win at Cincinnati. We knew that it was going to be a tall order, and the Ravens weren't up to the challenge. But the AFC quarterback situation aside, pretty interesting to look in the NFC. And Green Bay wins the division, and they're rewarded by having the Giants come into Lambeau once again for a postseason game. I think that one's pretty interesting there. That Giants defense has played well. That going up against a red-hot Aaron Rodgers, that should be a pretty interesting one. And then, Lions and Seahawks, Seattle.
It's hard for me to take Detroit seriously. I watched them play the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, they've shown the breakdown since Stafford had that finger issue. Now he played some good, tough competition down the stretch as well. But I saw a breakdown of his numbers before the finger issue cropped up. Much different story for him. So going to
there's
Seattle,
another quarterback issue, right?
Yeah. Going to Seattle, you would think the Seahawks shouldn't have trouble there. But at the same time, this is a Seattle team that looked really, really good at times this year. But other times they've looked pretty lousy. So, that's still a team that no Earl Thomas. Do you trust the defense quite as much? I'd certainly like them in this game.
Yeah, I like that they're home, and I like that they're playing these slappies who can't get out of the way.
Exactly. But as far as Seattle making a run, I'm kind of skeptical about their chances. But we'll see. Russell Wilson, the Super Bowl winning quarterback, still a lot of talent on that defense, even with some of the injuries they've had. So, I'm not buying what Detroit is trying to sell as far as nice season for them to get in the playoffs, but I really don't see them making much of a run.
Yeah, well, now the fantasy's over. We have real point spread. So Houston's a 3.5-point favorite. Detroit is an 8-point underdog in Seattle.
I have to stop you there. The Houston with their quarterback
situation, it's unbelievable, right?
They're a favorite. It's amazing. It is incredible. That Texans offense that was not just worse than the Ravens offense this year, but markedly worse.
Oh, yeah, worst
and
ever.
They're in the tournament, and they're favored in the first round. That right there tells you all you need to know about this AFC.
And they're sleeping at home on Friday night as well. Sunday, Pittsburgh's a 10-point favorite over Miami, and the Green Bay Packers are a 4-point favorite over Eli Manning and the New York Giants. Last thing for you, as bad as it went in Cincinnati, at least no one from our team got arrested in Hamilton County on Monday night the way Pac-Man Jones did. Here we go again for Marvin, right? Marvin's trying to make reasons for keeping his job at this point, and he's got star players and a guy that he went to bat for, like Perfect. I mean, these guys that he steps up and goes to bat for sure make him look foolish sometimes in the morning, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's the same discussion we've had at a few different points in his tenure. I mean, it's amazing to think, he's been there since 2003. I mean, we're talking about John Harbaugh going into year number 10, and Marvin, now we're talking 15 years he's been there. But, when you talked about, we talked about this last year with what happened to them in the meltdown late in the Pittsburgh playoff loss. And you just wonder.
No other coach would have survived that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt. Because that gets blamed on the coach, whether it's the coach's fault or not.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things where at this point, and look, I know the affinity you have for Marvin. Certainly I have a great deal of respect for him with what he's been able to accomplish throughout his coaching career and the way he was able to turn things around in Cincinnati when you look at what they were for, well over a decade. But at the same time, you look at this core, and that's what happened with Pac-Man Jones, the latest arrest. You just look at this core of players, and you just really think, what's going to be different?
How are they going to win the Super Bowl next year?
Yeah,
right.
He's been down this road so long, and a lot of it hasn't been his fault either. I mean, the Brown family. I mean, they've had some years here recently where they've had cap space where they could have been that team to go out and make a dynamic signing like the Broncos have done in recent years with certain guys. But they never really did that. They kind of just relied on developing and keeping their own guys and letting some of their own guys go. And but they never made that move that made you think they're going to break through the glass ceiling. This is what puts them over the top.
Well, they've had some special players that they've drafted there over the last decade, which is, they've gotten really good productivity, from 10 or 12 guys who've been their core guys.
Sure. I mean, but the thing is, they had resources, or at least cap resources available that they could have gone out, that missing piece, and whatever it was in a given year over the last 5 or 6 years, that they could have gotten that one free agent to put them over the top, and they never really did it. And now, they've already lost some guys, like Reggie Nelson left this past year for them, for example. They've lost some key guys, and I think you just feel like that window hasn't necessarily shut entirely, but it feels like their championship window, or it's maybe silly to say that about the Bengals. Let's say their window to maybe get to a conference championship game. Let's start with that. A couple years ago, felt like they had a chance to do that if they had augmented their core that they already had, and you just never really saw them do that. And
it's hard to think they're going to win 12 games next year, and we're sitting around here over the next 6 months trying to figure out how the Ravens are going to win 12 games next year.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Ravens. You knock on wood that they don't have off-field issues, because you have that on top of going 8-8. Then that's something that look, John Harbaugh. At the end of the day, just like Marvin Lewis, just like any coach in the NFL, these are grown men. They're going to make choices. They're going to make good choices. They're going to make bad choices. But you have an 8-8 team, and then if you start having some off-field issues, like say the Ravens did a few years ago, then that becomes a much different dynamic. I mean, you want these guys, even if they're not good enough. You certainly want them to be good citizens off the field, and you don't want to be dealing with that issue on top of things, because that's just going to make things look that much more, maybe not dire, but everything is under the microscope even more then. So hearing that for Marvin Lewis, not a good way to start the off season for the Bengals, and just makes you hope that you don't hear those kind of things if you're the Ravens or any other team.
We got a crazy week ahead here as we get through the fallout from Black Monday, where the Bills are looking for a coach. We're going to have the Jacksonville Jaguars looking for a coach. Denver's now looking for a coach. So lots of stuff going on and off the field this week, including out at Owings Mills. Luke will be on the scene for all things there, and John Harbaugh, and any fallout news, you'll get it first out at WNST.net. He is Baltimore for Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net if you need to reach him. I'm Nasty at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Anything you miss here, you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It is 2017. Work it off. It's $10 a month. Get over to Planet Fitness. They'll take great care of you there. You can get some inspiration at Planet of Triumphs as well. Last but never least, the breaking news. As we mentioned before, you never know when it's going to happen this week. You never know when Dan Duquette's going to make that big move. You get it first in the WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis will be here on Thursday with the SSV on WNST. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.